So anyway, if I can kind of sum up my career and we can get into the data here, I've been a CEO, COO, CFO. I've been paid to do all these things: speak, write, design, shoot, judge, professor, founder, partner, licensee, advisor, coach. Those
run out of fingers.
Near poverty level wages in low tier profession. I had never heard the word near poverty level wages in my entire almost 30-year history in the beauty industry until I read this one report, and then it came up 5 times at least. The term was repeated. A little bit dramatic.
What are the financial realities of employees working in the beauty industry? How do those realities contradict what people perceive as what people make in the beauty industry?
A couple points of clarity in terms of data collection, because people race to the same type of conclusion. So a couple things just for your listeners.
Welcome to The Millionaire Hairstylist, where our mission is to improve the financial well-being of creative professionals. We often like to say that hairstylists are uniquely positioned for financial success. Well, today our guest, Tom Kuhn, who is the founder of Qnity, they do financial education and coaching for salons and beauty schools all over the country. He actually has data to back up this claim. Over the past few years, Tom and his team of data scientists have been on a mission to uncover the truth and overturn commonly held misconceptions and myths about the financial standing of hairstylists in the US. What he has uncovered in his pro beauty compensation study will absolutely floor you. And he'll also raise the red flag about pending legislation in the United States that's based on these misconceptions people have about hairdressers and their income. And if this legislation goes through, it's going to threaten 90% of the beauty schools in the United States. I mean, with a setup like that, I won't hold you back any longer, except to say, if you've been enjoying this relaunch of The Millionaire Hairstylist, please give us a like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or give us a 5-star review in the podcast platform of your choosing. Okay, here we go. Here's Tom Kuhn on The Millionaire Hairstylist.
Tom, we're so excited. I don't think we've ever had both a father-daughter in 2 separate episodes and 2 people from the same organization. So I'm super looking forward to talking to your daughter, Erin, and we'll be covering more of the Qnity story. But let's start with you and just tell us your story as a salon owner, as a CPA, and then, of course, as the founder of Qnity. Where does this begin for you?
Oh, gosh. So how do you keep it short and sweet? You know, I started out my career as a CPA. And it really began a chapter that lasted for 2 years and 1 day. I worked for a very big firm. I hated working for a big firm. Nothing against the firm. It's one of the large firms in the country, but really felt that I wasn't in the space I wanted to be in, because I was working for big companies. I was wearing a suit and a tie. And so at an early age, this really was kind of unconventional at the time. I went solo. I was the only one of my peers that at the age of 25 became a solopreneur. And essentially what it was my journey into creating a lifestyle for myself that worked. And I quickly learned that I could make more money working less time and have 2 months off a year if I worked solo, primarily as a contract basis accountant. But then I realized that I was capped out, so I started to work at a local CPA firm because I needed to have income to report. Not that I didn't have income to report, but I needed a W-2 and we were going to start a family and all that stuff. And I felt it was time to go back inside a company. So I started out really as more of a gun for hire. Then I became a solopreneur. And then I became what I'd call an entrepreneur. I was working for someone else, but I was responsible for building the business. And then, it just got to the point, now this brings us to the beauty industry. It was about 14 years into my career. And I was tired of being part of a firm. And I really felt like I wanted to be in an industry where I could work with small business owners to help them become more successful. So it was through a set of circumstances, I joined distribution. I started out in Nevada distribution, relocated from Minnesota out to Colorado. And I worked in distribution as a CFO, then the executive VP. And what I found in working with salons and spas, they're small businesses owned primarily by creative entrepreneurs. It just really had an upfront and center view that most of our customers really struggled on the finance side. So I left myself and started a small business that really became a consulting firm. And that's where I started to really become an educator in the beauty industry. That's when things started to blossom for me. I'd already built a bunch of relationships in the beauty industry and distribution, but it created a course. It was called Getting Behind the Numbers. and a chair was in there, but it was crossed out. It was a very, very basic course. And I started to be invited to speak across the country. And so again, I left distribution, went off on my own, and became an educator, became an entrepreneur, small business owner. And then during that time frame, I was an endorsed service. I helped people do business plans, financial projections, coaching, all that kind of stuff. I had like 2 people working with me. But then a significant event happened. One of my clients, which was a premier Aveda salon, in fact, the original and largest Aveda salon in the world, which previously had been called the Horst Salons, name changed to Jute, I was invited to come in and be a co-owner and the CEO. So that's where I went, running a 400-person, 8-location, over $20 million salon spa company. And that's where I really started to gain an appreciation working directly with the individuals, because we had a full team of hairstylists, massage therapists, estheticians, nail techs. And I started to really see firsthand some really big gaps in terms of how people were learning things such as financial matters. And so one of the things I like to say is the biggest fan of a spreadsheet is the creator of that particular spreadsheet. And
so true.
And so much of our coaching was spreadsheets, And, I mean, to me, the thing that always popped in my mind, it was like, it became sort of an issue of respect. If you know that you have a learner that really learns primarily with visual communication and in a simple format, if you're really trying to cram a bunch of text and numbers down their throat, it's sort of like going to a different country and someone speaking a language and they can't understand, but they keep saying it again and again, and ultimately you just shut down. So anyway, if we're doing a career trajectory, you gentlemen have to understand I've been around a long time. I don't know if this podcast has enough time to cover my whole career.
But I'm loving this. This is such a great journey. Yeah. And Tom, what we find a lot is we love speaking to people who came up as hairstylists. That's Cash. But we also love speaking to people who came from outside the industry, because they always bring a perspective that maybe is not common. And then when in your case, really getting your hands very dirty, working and running a chain of salons, like now you have that's legitimately validating, what we say, qualifying experience, especially for people in our audience many of them who are salon owners or creative entrepreneurs. Like you've been in the trenches, you've done this work. And what a great perspective to have.
Gave me a bunch of street credit. If you consider someone just running a one location salon with a staff of 10 people or 20 people, it's 100x more complicated. So pretty much everything that you possibly can experience as a salon owner, when you're at that scale, you're going to experience it so many different times. So consider it to be it was 6 years that I was part of that company before I sold my ownership and moved on to create Qnity. But what an education that I had, and what a privilege I had to be able to have that type of compressed experience. I mean, it was a lifetime of experience compressed in 6 years. Then I had a little bit of a mission, something I had to prove, if you will. I'd always been seen as sort of the numbers guy, the accountant and that. Even though I was running a business and I was in charge of marketing, education, and human capital, very active with the team, there was still this sort of stigma that I had, that people still saw me like as the accountant. And yet I was really promoting the importance of creativity and working with creative people. So without actually organically trying to do this, I took a hiatus. I knew I was taking a hiatus after that, but I didn't know that I was going to become a photographer. And so I became a photographer. And it isn't like I said, I'm going to become a photographer. It started with one picture. Most of my life can kind of be summed up in light bulb moments, In fact, that's what my whole podcast is, and I'm writing a book on light bulb moments. But it literally was this like shadow selfie, all right? At the time, the word selfie didn't exist. But essentially what I did is I had a camera that I'd hold in front of me, and I would just go to different places, and whatever light was behind me would project a shadow. So I had shadow photos that had a graffiti theme. So I'd find places in New York City and there'd be graffiti, and I'd take my picture in front of that. Nature, ton of nature in Minnesota. Winter. So I created sort of this theme-based set of photography that was built upon a simple idea. and that is that, shadows, in order to produce a shadow, you need light. So really the theme of the book was finding light, which really I was trying to do, was trying to find light. But what it did, so I published a whole book. I actually exhibited photos. I had a salon in New York that actually hung my photos there for several years. I presented to the team, told some stories. So it was a very, very different journey for someone like me with my background, And so I learned vulnerability, and I also learned composition. I learned editing. I learned design. And that was pivotal period for me, formative, to really legitimately claim that I guess I'm what's considered to be a whole brain thinker.
Definitely.
And so I became CEO of a hair and spa and a skincare manufacturer for a while. And then ultimately I started Qnity, which initially was just consulting and helping people, just do different pieces in their business. But then Qnity really started to have a point of view and start to have a idea behind it that still carries on today. And so Qnity right now is a company that consists of multiple units to it. We have a division that is Qnity for Schools that works financial literacy for students. We also have Qnity for Business, which is our primary activity, working with small business salons, the small business owners. But then we also have gotten into the data business, as you gentlemen, I think, are aware. So anyway, if I can kind of sum up my career, and we can get into the data here. So I've been in the beauty industry. I've been a CEO, COO, CFO. I've been paid to do all these things: speak, write, design, shoot, judge, professor, founder, partner, licensee, advisor, coach. Those are just a few things.
Well, anyone that says the beauty industry has limited career options with limited financial rewards doesn't know what they're talking about. And I think we're going to get into that when we start talking about data. Before we get there, I just want to say that Tom is, if he were an animal, he would be my spirit animal. I feel like we're very similar in nature. We both discovered transhemispheric thought, where you eliminate this myth that you're either right-brained or left-brained and you can't develop the other side. And as Tom, we've discussed, I am a huge believer in the development of the brain and the development of the body. And I think so many of us are under this myth that our identity is tied to these limiting beliefs of like, just because we naturally cling to exercising one side of the brain doesn't mean the other can't be developed. And I think you've been a great expose of that. And in my career, I think, I've strived to understand the numbers, understand the business side of things, build the spreadsheets, do the spreadsheet thing, and make beautiful art. And so I'm with you 100% on that. There is no limit, to how far we can develop our minds and develop our bodies. So now, that being said, Tom, I'm super excited to be talking to you again, and we've spoken several times, because you've done something really incredible. I think you've gone out and done an incredible amount of work to dispel some serious myths in the industry. Share with me a little bit about what you're doing in data, and then I want to hear what some of these industry myths are that you're tackling, and then we'll kind of dive into what they are.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll start with the myths. So there's then this pervasive myth that just has followed the beauty industry around for a very long time, and essentially that it's a low-tier profession with correspondingly low earnings, and that it's just not a career that's financially viable. And I've heard that, I've seen that from the public. Problem is, I haven't seen that from an actual fact standpoint. Having had access to data for the last 28 years in the beauty industry, when you see numbers that are published out there that really are intended to represent a career and earnings in the career, it just doesn't make sense. And now, it's one thing to say it doesn't make sense, it's another thing to actually prove it. And there is definitely stereotypes, but there's also some very intentional campaigns to perpetuate the stereotypes. And there's organizations that really, I think the best way to put it is that they have an agenda. And usually it falls in two areas. Number one is organizations that have an agenda that because they want to disallow federal funds for students to go into the trade. and the other area is to de-license the industry. So while they appear to be well-meaning and well-intended, they sensationalize it. And I'll give you some tangible examples of what I mean by that. So these voices are very well-funded and very well-connected voices that have a direct influence on the government. In other words, they have the government's ear. So some examples of some of the narrative that's out there, I'm just going to read a couple to you. And all right, this one, near poverty level wages in low tier profession. Now, I had never heard the word near poverty level wages in my entire almost 30-year history in the beauty industry until I read this one report, and then it came up 5 times at least. 5 times in the report, the term poverty level wages was repeated. A little bit dramatic. Here's another one. Low wages, work long hours with very little time off. So we do a study, and we find, let's get to the no time off. We found in our study that the average professional worked 27 and a half hours a week. We also found that the average hourly, if it were equated to an hourly, was over $38 an hour. And so to me, now, if you annualize that, the number was almost 55,000 on average. We also found that if it was adjusted to full-time, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics does, then the average earner, average W-2 would have been almost $80,000.
This is, we want to live here on this one for just a second, or let's come back to it, because this to me is the biggest light bulb in the entire report, Tom. But I want to just take one quick step back and say, you mentioned earlier that Qnity, which is your organization that focuses on the education of people in the hair industry, and you have multiple divisions that cover that. We'll talk more with Aaron about the details of Qnity, but one of those branches of your company now is data. So you guys went out recognizing that there were these myths that you felt were leading the industry and maybe even leading policy, and I'd love to know more about that, in the wrong direction. You said, let's go talk to salons. Let's go look at W-2s. This is not survey. This is actually getting people to submit their W-2s in an anonymous portal. Let's run the numbers ourselves. And so now what you're identifying, and you say this in your report, which is called the Beauty Compensation Study, you say the first problem is that there's this terminology that's going around. There's this idea that's going around. And you mentioned too, near poverty level wages. Here's another New York Times headline, a $21,000 cosmetology school debt and a $9 an hour job. And there's just this idea of like, it's like almost like the cosmetology, the beauty industry is almost like it's a scam. And that someone needs to sound the alarm about how this is doing poorly for professionals. And then you guys went and got actual data to say, this is not the correct perception. Am I summarizing that well?
Yeah, you are. And, you know, getting involved in this project, it was not on our plan. It happened very organically and very naturally and just picked up momentum. And it really, so it started out extremely simple. I'll give you sort of the impetus behind it. It had nothing to do with doing anything with public policy. It had nothing to do with educating the public. It was really to help salon owners have their staff better understand how much money they actually made. A quick story about a gentleman by the name of Adam called me. I was in Europe. He needed to talk to me. I came home, called him right away. He says, Tom, I'm thinking about quitting my job. By the way, he worked for a sibling, and he wanted to quit his job because he wasn't making enough money. And I'll cut to the chase. I did a little math with him over the phone, and I said, Adam, not his real name, I said, you don't need another job. You don't need to leave. You're making $147,000 a year, and you're working 40 hours a week. You're not working any overtime, and you have benefits. I said, that puts you in the top 8% of earners in the U.S. So it was like, my God, that is a huge myth within the industry. Most don't understand their paycheck, and they grossly underestimate their own earnings. In many cases, they use a net number when someone else is using a gross number. Oh, you're only making that, and I'm making that.
Before and after taxes, basically.
Yes. So I think the root cause for a lot of this is a lack of financial literacy, but I'll get on that soapbox in a little bit here. So anyway, we started very organically. Literally, it was 13 locations, 13 salon locations that they showed us 2021 W-2s, just did a little average. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So then we opened it up, and it was like, all right, we have a conference coming up. Let's get a few more companies involved in this. We had a non-disclosure. There was like 3 of us working on it. It was like, very, very organically. And I think we got, I don't know how many data points. It was maybe 1,300 data points. Not bad, And then all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose because people started to see the findings. We'll call this phase 2 of the report. And it was still a relatively small sample size. But 2 days after we presented the findings at a conference, someone brought it to the Department of Education, brought it into a meeting. And all of a sudden, everybody in the industry started to say, wow, we've got some traction here to get some data. How do we keep that going? So I had talked about this idea with people before, and we talked about collaborating with this organization, that organization, but it never went anywhere. So one of the first key ideas was we started out with the whole philosophy to go fast, go alone. I just said, no partners needed. We're just going to do this because we need it fast. So phase 1 is we went solo. We had no sponsors. We did it all on our own, no funds, funded the whole thing, and did it sort of on the fly. Round 2, it turned into a massive collaboration. We had great support from some of the beauty brands. We had it turned into a massive collaboration. So it moved from traveling fast alone to traveling far by traveling together. And I honestly, last summer, I was going to take part of the summer off to do a little hiatus. And that didn't happen. It really consumed me for a year. I mean, May to May. I mean, it was like, what did I sign up for here? Because I knew when you get into space, you don't have much wiggle room. There's no wiggle room for breaches of confidentiality. It was a daunting responsibility, to tell you the truth. It was daunting. And we had our head down for a very, very long time on that. Hence, a very in-depth report that really, I think, does create an essay and a story that could be told that's a little more accurate. So fast forward to what happened with this. In the same week, Erin Kuhn, who's my daughter and partner, was on Capitol Hill, meeting directly with staff of Congress, members of Congress. And then I was on a call with the White House, different divisions, but all under the White House, talking about the study, really advocating for better understanding around a career in the professional beauty industry.
If you want to dig deeper into improving your relationship with money as a creative professional, go to millionairehairstylistpodcast.com, create a free student account, and you can access over 4 hours of free financial lessons on topics like calculating exactly what financial freedom would look like for you as a creative professional. Go to millionairehairstylistpodcast.com, create your free account today.
So by the time this report is published, you have over a dozen advisors and experts working on this data. You have dozens of corporate partners and sponsors, thousands of people who have submitted their data into this study. So as we start to walk through the information, I just want the audience to understand this is an extremely comprehensive and in-depth look at what are the financial realities of employees working in the beauty industry. And then as we've started to allude to earlier, how do those realities contradict what people perceive as what people make in the beauty industry?
A couple points of clarity in terms of data collection, because when you get in this area, people race to the same type of conclusion. So a couple things just for your listeners. Number one, we didn't actually collect W-2s directly from an employee. What we did is we had employers submit data anonymously. There was no personal information identified. So we had employers input data into a third-party template through an independent CPA firm. So we didn't actually connect directly with employees, but nor was there even one iota of risk in terms of release of personal information. The second thing about it is we were super transparent in the report. And there was one key idea to this, and that is that no one was willing to tackle this subject of trying to figure out earnings for pro beauty. Very well-known research companies turned the project down. because of the whole issue with taxation and getting earnings data from independents. So our two simple ideas, and this was the breakthrough ideas. Don't try to do it all at once, and disclose, start somewhere. Everybody wants the full pie. They want to know, people at chains, independents, small salons, but
1099 commission, booth renters, that's not what this is at this stage.
Yeah. So it was like, do you want no pie or a slice of the pie? Let's get a slice of the pie so we can, then get more slice of the pie. And the second thing was use the W-2s. Just use W-2s because it's standardized, it's verifiable, et cetera. How do we deal with taxes and underreporting? We said, you know what? If it's on the W-2, it shows up in the report. If it's not, this is not a tip audit. So those were some core assumptions that allowed us to get unstuck and make progress. Now, fast forward to today. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We have just completed the second year of this. And we're just a little early on the podcast. Have me back in a little bit and I'll give you the updated findings. But we just did the second year. Number two is we have been retained by the chains. Several of the chains have come together and commissioned us to do a study for that segment. So these are 11 plus locations is how we define a chain.
I want to ask about that later. Yes, I'm very curious about how that affects the data.
So would it be fair to say, what would you say about the reportings, the factual reporting that you have? You've probably eliminated a portion of income that is not being counted. So would you say that the numbers are probably better than what's reported, or what's reported, that's it?
Absolutely better. They have to be. I mean, the assumption in the study is an assumption, again, it was beyond the scope to figure out if someone reported tips or not. There's absolutely no doubt that this number is lower than actual, just due to the basic facts around underreporting of income. Especially speaking specifically of tips, because these are W-2 earners.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've the last 3 times I've gotten my hair cut in a major metropolitan area in New York City, I have Venmo'd the tip to my stylist. So that's not going on their W-2.
In my experience in talking with, hundreds of hairstylists, I don't think I've spoken to a single one or run a fundamental analysis of their business where we discovered that their hourly earnings were less than $75. Now, I don't think I've found a single one that I'm working with. And these are typically higher performers. But when we did the math, their hourly income and that they're producing through their labor wasn't less than $75 an hour. And it was, and this is not a sample size. It's not, coming off their W-2s, just getting into their QuickBooks, and running the simple math. So, I mean, the data, when you start including tips and other streams of income, because I know a lot of hairstylists, they're doing haircuts with their friends at home and making $100 there. They're doing stuff, like side hustle stuff sometimes. So I can't imagine that the numbers couldn't even be significantly higher than anticipated. And you'd agree with that?
Absolutely. We didn't even bring up the subject of side hustle. And if the average is working 27 and a half hours a week, a lot of them are using that time for family and lifestyle, but there's got to be a significant portion that's a side hustle. So I think that, it's beyond the scope of the study, but absolutely a low number due to not really being a tip audit. And number 2, not adjusting for any side hustles or anything like that.
I mean, but the report shows that the headlines are crazily dramatic, because the headlines are near poverty wages.
Yeah.
When you're showing that they're making $80,000 a year.
Yeah, and we showed that. And now, Cash, you had mentioned, working with people not less than $75 an hour, and they're probably at more elite salons.
Yeah.
Our study was community-based salons. These are small, average maybe a team of 12. Very small, all over the country. So these are not outliers. These are your bread and butter community salons. And in fact, I think when we went through the highest earnings, we didn't have like high representation from big major markets. So it isn't like this disproportionate because of New York or San Francisco or something like that. So, But a lot of people still challenge it and say, oh, these are more sophisticated, these are better salons, these are the market leaders. And I don't know, man. We found that 24% would have been six-figure earnings if adjusted to a 40-hour work week. 24%.
Let's start there. Okay, so we understand how the study came about. It started as a smaller operation for you, just really focused on the idea of educational literacy or financial literacy, and understanding that maybe some stylists didn't understand their income. And then it grew and grew. And in this latest phase, as you mentioned, you have all these partners and a lot more data that's been inputted in ways that are obviously very tricky, and you had to navigate that. So then you outputted this report, and you do a really nice job in the report of setting up the myths. As we said earlier, there's this perception of cosmetology as a low income, near poverty level career path for people that has a bunch of limitations, and we'll go through them one at a time here, that you found is not really reflected in the data that you uncovered. So let's start with earnings. And Tom, I'd love for you to explain, I think the annualization aspect is a huge light bulb in the misunderstanding of income from hairstylists. Because can you speak to some of the findings in the earnings side of it? Just how much money are hairstylists making, and what are the misunderstandings around that?
Yeah, so what we found was that the average actual W-2 was $54,307. So that would be the average. And we also found that the average also worked 27 and a half hours a week, which equates to an average hourly of $38.37. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses an average hourly rate of $17.30. So we have $38.37 versus $17.30. So we have that piece.
Huge discrepancy. Huge discrepancy.
So now, given the average W-2 is $54,000, and essentially these are individuals working 27 and a half hours a week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, at least according to the data and reports I've read, adjusts things to 40 hours. So they're really based on that. So if we were to adjust those earnings to a 40-hour work week, the average W-2 would jump up to $79,807. Average.
That's huge. That's huge. So because what I'm understanding from reading this report is that a lot of stylists are just not working 40 hours a week. And then you will go on, let's talk about in a second flexibility. And oftentimes that's their preference, that they want that flexibility. They want that time for family, for kids, for side hustles. And so when the government comes in and looks at their annual income, they're assuming, or they're basing their data off of a 40-hour work week. What you're finding is that's the wrong number to divide by. It's really closer to like you said, 27 hours a week. And that if that 27-hour week employee were to be working 40 hours, and again, you also found many salons would allow for that. People are welcome to work more if they want to, that the average would actually be almost $80,000 a year. So based on your data, thousands of W-2s, if someone wants to put in a 40-hour week, there's an $80,000 a year income available to them. That's a huge, huge discrepancy from the near poverty wages perception that the industry or that the larger economy has about this profession.
You know what's really interesting is that the salons that submitted the data, most salons really weren't super interested in the study because they already knew it. They know, me as a former salon, I knew this, The schools had a really great interest in the study because the schools are the ones that are under attack. And and I made this really clear in the report, this study was not designed to have anything to do with pending legislation, public debate. I mean, it had nothing to do with it. It was a very simple idea. We're just trying to help these community-based salons better educate their team on how much money they make for coaching. It was never intended to be thrown into the thick of government-related affairs. So, yeah, salons are like, well, I know that. I know my team makes that much, but their benefit is now I got it in paper. I can go back to my team and show that, hey, this is real,
Well, I mean, there is a industry-wide problem. You could say systemic problem with the reputation and stereotypes that have been given to creatives like hairdressers in the beauty industry, working at salons or working independently. It's obvious. I've walked onto set, and in the beginning of my career, even as a hairdresser, to the end of my career, on set working as a hairstylist, financially successful and making more than the CEO of the company who was running the shoot. And I think there is an immediate stereotype when someone says you're a hairstylist. They financially line you up and say, okay, so you're a person that doesn't do well financially. You're one of those creative types that can't get their stuff together and maybe doesn't care too much about money, or just either isn't making real money. And what that does is those people go on and be parents, right? And the last thing they want their kids doing is doing one of these careers, where in fact the lifestyle you've talked about in this report, and this is something that I want to talk about because it's fascinating to me, and it's more important now, more relevant now than ever, because lifestyle,
bingo,
even when I'm hiring right now, is what is driving the primary factor over the pay. So you went in and as part of your study and said, well, there's a lot more going on than financial benefit. Talk about some of the other attributes that you discovered as far as the quality of the career path that this is, and why this whole stereotype of like, oh, you just must not be successful is utter garbage.
Yeah. So one of the things that we made clear in the report is that compensation is more than a paycheck. And so compensation includes earnings, but it also includes other things beyond earnings. So we established that baseline that certainly earnings was a significant part of this, but it's more. So we broke it down. We actually did an infographic. I'm going to pull it out right here so I have it as a reference. So we really broke down what does compensation look like for a career in professional beauty. And we broke it down into earnings. We already talked about that. We broke it down to flexibility. I mentioned it's actually 27.8 hours a week. I think I said 27.5. 99% of these employers offer flexibility. So we then got to the subject of benefits. 96% of these community-based salons offered benefits. Education. Even though if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics description of the beauty industry, it says that it doesn't offer training. But 90% of these community-based businesses offer new hire training. 89% contribute to the cost of advanced education. We also got into the subject of ownership, 85% being female ownership, possibilities, all the different career paths. For example, we outlined at least 30 different career paths that are normal and available to somebody as a licensed professional. We got into the subject of return on investment and found a 4 to 6 year student loan payback. And then we had a more subjective category that we put under passion. So it was at Qnity, we have these things called 9 grids. We used it as a mind map. So in the center, it's about what compensation, or the 8 factors. And then the surrounding fields really breaks compensation into those 8 key factors: earnings, flexibility, benefits, training, inclusion, possibilities, return on investment, and passion.
And would you say that what are your thoughts if you had to pick one, the primary reason people enter the beauty industry as hairstylists? Is it money? Is it flexibility, passion? Which one of these would be the primary driver people even get into this business? And why do you think that?
That's not a curveball to me. I'm trying to give you a good answer to that one, and it wouldn't be a data answer. I just give you
your opinion.
My perspective. I think that it's for people that don't, in many cases, for someone that doesn't want to go through the traditional 4-year degree, the cost, it's taxing on your ATM, your attention, time, and money to go to a 4-year school. Certainly the creative aspect of it, certainly it's going to attract someone that is more of a visual learner. I'm maybe not your best commentator on that, but I certainly know that it does attract people that have art and heart, as a sort of a general combination. And, I had some very interesting realizations when I went from working at a CPA firm and then worked at a beauty distributor. I literally had gone through training in terms of, don't touch another human being, keep your space, It was good and important training that had to do with, harassment, et cetera.
Right.
Okay.
Just corporate formality of human interaction in that context. Yeah.
Which makes total sense. I go into the beauty industry and it becomes a hug fest, and boy, was I conflicted. It took me a long time to get used to that.
I think your insight, Tom, is absolutely correct, which is that and as you said, this is not a data-driven answer, but when you look at the data, it's often like saying, it's like, well, do people want food? Well, it's like, well, they're all here at the grocery store, so they must want what's here at the grocery store, right? So when you look at the data and you see how many of these jobs people have an option to work 40 hours a week. I mean, it's self-reported that the employers are saying they do, but we know hairstylists who talk about reducing the hours that they work or wanting more time for family or wanting more time for side hustles. So we see this too. And then you talk about benefits. Now keep in mind, these are W-2 employees. So the hairstylists in there who are commission-based or 1099, obviously there's a different subset in the future. I think you guys are looking at trying to cover that as well. But just seeing that and then even the onset training or the on-job training one is one that I find very interesting, that there would be a perception that there is no on-the-job training, because we talk with hairstylists all the time some of them who don't like that aspect of people expect to be trained when they come in, even if they've come out of hair school. But it's a known aspect of this industry, which is, Cash, you started sweeping hair so that you could be an assistant to somebody so that you could then be on the floor. So on-the-job training, being paid while you're doing it, by the way, that's integral to the salon life. That's a huge part of it.
I mentioned my transition from working at a CPA firm into beauty distribution. And one of the most striking things for me was, as a CPA or other professional fields, and cosmetology is a professional field, but other professional fields like accounting, you take education because you have to take it. It's required to have your continuing education credits. You need it for your license. It was mandatory. It was go through the motions. Everybody hated it. And it sort of forced yourself to go to these classes. I joined the beauty industry. It was such a different mindset. It was like, oh my God, they love education. Wow, these are like learners. They can't get more education. It was really striking to me. It had a big impact to me in terms of life as a lifelong learner and someone that embraces curiosity. It was really inspiring for me. So,
and you know what? The reason I think that is, and this is just my opinion here, I don't have an 80-page report to back this up, but I think being a hairstylist, the reason that we love education is because we took this job on one hope, that it would make us happier than the alternatives. And the compensation points you pointed out, freedom, flexibility, passion, those are all things that I think are critical to the human spirit. And those are all things that I think hairdressers believe the corporate ladder life robs from you. You can only get promoted when someone else says you can. So you're losing that flexibility. You get told what to do when. You have, your compensation is completely based on, your quarterly review. This is a totally different world. And I think the reason we sort of went down this path and went into the arts and took the risk was to do that. And it wasn't because we were initially planning on hoping to get rich. That's not the thing. If you want to get rich, you're going to have to make severe sacrifices, and and it may require some unhappiness for a while. But I think that path, it spurs on, or it spurred the reason for why they go, okay, now I'm doing my own thing. I've taken the risk to be happy. I have to learn how to get good at this so that I can actually, do my passion to a standard that makes me happy and excited and I'm praised for, right? In order to succeed, I have to teach myself and pursue it myself instead of showing up to work and being told what you have to do, where to go, and what to study. I think that's kind of the reason why we're so passionate about education. What are your thoughts?
We actually do have a little bit of data as it relates to what the motivators are. Maybe not why someone comes to the industry, but why they're in the industry. We would routinely measure 4 years when someone would go through a service provider. I wish I had a better name for a stylist, colorist, massage therapist, et cetera, et cetera. And we would ask, what's most important to you? Earning more money, doing what you love, or quality of life? The bottom of the list was always making more money. It was either doing what you love or quality of life. Now, certain individuals were in a financial crisis, whatever, and they rated number one, but it was never the number one motivator.
And you point that out, Tom, as a huge counterpoint to the poverty level wages misconception, because you point out, you say, well, look, we've surveyed thousands of hairstylists. This is not just in this study. You're talking about the Qnity educational program. You've had lots of licensed cosmetologists come through. And when you ask them what they're most interested in, and almost half of them say, I'm most interested in doing what I love, you have to look at the BLS and say, wait a second, if all these people are living this horrible poverty, near poverty level career, then wouldn't the first thing they smash the button on be, I want to earn more money? But instead, that's not the top answer.
Bingo.
Yeah, you'd have massive income flight. People would be leaving the job left and right if these were real wages that were causing this much suffering. And one, Tom, you mentioned that it's not the number one reason. One thing I've noticed, and I don't know if you noticed this as well, is the age of the individual. Those priorities shift as the individual ages significantly. So I think there is a huge mistake that beauty professionals make, and I think it's a huge mistake creative service providers, creative entrepreneurs make as well, and that's to overemphasize and overfocus on the emotional payoff of the career and underfocus on the importance of financial performance, because so many people are waiting till they're 40 to figure out, oh, this is kind of a career of an athlete. I kind of don't want to be doing this when I'm 80. I'm not sure I'll be able to. And so there has to be some sort of focus there. Talk a little bit about the discoveries you've made with finances and people finding themselves in that position. You had 400 employees. Certainly, was there a time in which money started becoming more important? And tell me about that.
Well, I developed this simple little matrix, and it came from a lot of one-on-ones, and I generally would put people into one of 4 different quartiles as a motivator. A certain percentage of people, it was about greater earnings. That was number one motivator. Then there was this whole group, a growing group, and fast forward to today, it's really big. It's time, scheduling. So what's your motivator? Money, time off, and then there's a couple other ones. For many, it was just creative expression. I mean, that's what the one-on-one was. It wasn't about time off or money. It was, how can I be more involved in the creative aspects of the company, And then there's also a category of people that were really motivated by education. And it wasn't so much money or time off or creativity, but it was serving others through education. And found that, to your point, this is not static. This shifts over time. Someone will easily move around the quartile. Someone might start out, it's all about creativity. I don't care about the money, time off, or anything. Oh, then I'm starting to have a family. It's like, okay, it's a little bit more about money and time off. So it is a dynamic thing, and it does vary by the individual, and absolutely it recognizes the reality of the trade.
Now, I want to point out something that anyone who's reading this report might highlight to be almost, let's call it a devil's advocate for the misconceptions. And that is that you did not include in your data chains, right? You specifically looked at salons that had, was it less than 3 locations? I can't remember what your cutoff was, but I'm curious.
1 to 10 locations.
1 to 10 locations, which is, by the way, these are not, any 7 location business is not a small business, right? So it's not that you only looked at individual boutique salons, but you did also not look at, to use a crass example, supercuts, right? You're not looking at the people maybe that are cutting hair at a chain in a mall or at the Walmart, And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what data is available to you. And I know you mentioned you're about to go in that direction potentially. What data do you think you'll find in that segment of the industry? And also maybe if that data from that subset of a much lower price point hair service is also contributing to the misconception that is scaring people away from the businesses that we're talking about where they have a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, great. I'll comment. You mentioned a couple things. First of all, why we excluded them. It was super pragmatic. And at the time, we really needed to move with speed, and we had the momentum going. I had a team assembled, and I knew that working with a small employer, we didn't have to go through immense different layers of leadership and bureaucracy and security. And I knew that the lead time even to get a meeting and was months and months away. And ultimately just said, okay, that's it. We need to go. I'm making a decision. We're going to stick with 1 to 10. We'll come back to change later. So it was a good decision, and it in fact did prove correct. And they were supportive of the idea, the chains and chain association, and were very curious about it. What do I think the findings will be? So certainly there is going to be a large representative size of these larger employers that will be more value-priced salons, and also environments where they may not have the same opportunity to earn as much money. Having said that, you can look at another data point. You can simply go on to Indeed and other sites, and all of these companies are looking for staff right now. And if you look at the numbers that they're suggesting in these advertisements, most of them are over $30 an hour. And we do have some preliminary data from sort of normal priced, when I say normal priced, not necessarily very, very low price, but certainly not premium, and found that, for example, there's a men's salon group with over 100 locations, and their average earnings was very similar to what we had in the study. It was in that between $35 and $40. So certainly there's going to be a segment of the chains that will have a lower hourly rate, but also there's going to be several that are in that same ballpark. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is, remember, compensation's not just a paycheck. And when you factor in the things that are non-W-2, the opportunity still looks quite attractive when you put the whole compensation picture together.
I want to touch on one topic really quick, because Tom established quite a bit of authority in an opening statement, and I'm very curious about this myself. We've been talking about a lot about compensation, the clarity on that, the myths that kind of permeate our culture, not just the industry, our culture about a career in the beauty industry. Well, nowadays we know that there are billionaires in the beauty industry. And so the potential for massive earnings in this industry, to me, is higher than a lot of other degrees that you go to school for. And that's thanks to, people like product pioneers, brand pioneers. They're becoming entrepreneurs within the industry. Becoming an entrepreneur as a firefighter is much more difficult than it is with you when you have this myriad of opportunities. But one thing I'm realizing as I'm talking to hairstylists and creative entrepreneurs is that they are scared of, for lack of a better word, the size. They're scared of size. They think that staying small is easier. And I hear this all the time. I don't want any more employees. I don't want to do it. But you own multi-locations, 400 employees. What would you say? I would just love your opinion on the difficulty of, 10 employees versus 400 employees.
Well, there's a mouthful there. That last piece is, I only know 400 employees. That's the only sized salon I ran, and I've never really been an employer of a 10 location. But I know right now, in some respects, I think it might be easier with a larger organization, because at least at that point, you can afford people to help you manage human capital. You have professional human resources. You have people that can help coach. So ultimately, 400 people, it takes a village, and we had a village. So honestly, in a respect, I don't know, this might feel a little warped, but I think it's a little easier to run a large organization than a small one.
I do too. 10X is easier than 2X, according to Dan Sullivan.
Dan Sullivan. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been my experience as well. Yeah. I love Dan Sullivan. That's been my experience as well. And through scaling, I think there's sort of a barrier in entrepreneurialism that has to be broken to, where you hit the time capacity of yourself, and you have to break through that barrier, generate enough revenue to build economies of scale. I'd love to hear your opinion, because I also haven't owned a 400 employee salon chain or group of salons. Do salons become more profitable through economies of scale?
Not necessarily. Well, it depends what you mean by that. In most cases, the best opportunity is to go deeper in a salon's own business, as opposed to adding locations. We actually have a specialty in multi-locations. We actually have a conference. In fact, it's coming up next month. It's called 2 to 10, where we identified a segment of the marketplace. These are salons with between 2 and 10 locations. And we gather together for data, community, and all that stuff. And it's only 5% of the industry. To go from 1 to 2 locations is a jump. It's not easy. And to go from 2 to 3 is another big jump. It's easier to 10X a company like I have right now or you have right now. So I've thought about that a lot. I can't go to a salon and say, hey, work with us in 3 years, you're going to 10X your revenue. It's just with human capital issues, infrastructure, it's just, it's not a reality. What they can do, and we spend a lot of time identifying with salon owners, where are you in life? Do you want to grow? Do you want to go? Or you want to let go? And 2/3 of small businesses right now are owned by baby boomers, and there's a massive wave of transitions coming, and that's one of the areas that we're leaning into right now. So you may not be able to 10x revenues, but you might be able to 5x profitability. You might be able to 5x your enjoyment of life by getting out from behind the chair. So you can X in different KPI. But, I wouldn't be a truth teller if I said it was easy to 10x to go from 1 locations to 10. It could take you a decade,
But it's not even just about revenue, right? Because one of the things that we find with the students that we work with and that we've talked about for years is maybe it's not about 10xing the revenue of your salon. Maybe it's about buying the building. And then suddenly you have another form of income, because when you're ready to close that salon down in 20 years, you still own the building. You still have the real estate. Or maybe you are opening a second location because one of your stylists, we have one of our best favorite salon owner podcast guests of all time, Charlie, he talks about, hey, I had a stylist. She was ready to fly the coop, and she started she opened one of my salons with me as a partner in another city. So there's just all these interesting opportunities available to people that, as Cash said earlier, are not available to other careers and other professions.
And I'm curious to hear if you think that, because there's a lot of funds being started right now to buy up small businesses from the people exactly like you're talking about, much like the real estate business will come and find the tired landlord, baby boomer, who's owned a property for 25 years, tired of managing it, buying it up. And people are doing this with businesses as well. Like you said, do you think there's an opportunity for hairstylists to be acquiring other businesses as a mode of scaling? Or would you say that's not wise or advised for most hairstylists?
Here's what I'll say. A couple different things. I want to make sure that I'm going to answer your question, and I want to give you guys a shout out here. So this is the era of the trades. Everybody's talking about it more and more, that this is the era of the trade. And I think that this field is a field of the future. There's no question about it. And I'm more bullish than ever on the field. Absolutely. As it relates to building wealth and doing different things with your money and investing in businesses or real estate, I got to give a shout out to you guys because, Cash and Jordan, you guys are a huge inspiration. And what I think that you guys really excel at is showing people the possibility of being a millionaire and demonstrating that, make money in the trade, but where you deal with a lot of investing and stuff. What we do is we're a little bit more on the basic level. Sort of we get people to a certain point, it's like, boy, you should go see Cash at this point. A lot of what we do is we've got to get people to a baseline of financial literacy. And if we can get them to the baseline of financial literacy and start to see what the money they make, then we turn them over to Cash and say, okay, Cash is the guy. He'll demonstrate that you can form other businesses and all of that. So great job with your content and the direction you guys are taking. That's why I love collaborating with you guys.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. And Jordan, you wanted to shift to policy. I'll give it back to you now. You can have it.
I do think it's important because Cash was the first time I had even heard about this. And, it's interesting. We just had a conversation, Tom, with an asset protection attorney for this podcast. I don't know where in the sequence of episodes this will come out, but I was talking about legislation that's going to affect small businesses in 2024. It's always amazing to me how things can happen in a subset of the industry or policy or of government that everyone else, broadly speaking, is completely unaware of, but that has massive implications on certain members of our culture and society and workforce. So what's happening in the policy world as it relates to beauty schools, hair schools, getting your cosmetology license? What's going on, and what can you tell us about the state of affairs in that side of the world?
Well, I'll qualify this by saying this is a very pedestrian and summarized version and partially in my wheelhouse from an overview standpoint. And one of the things when you undertake a project like this, you move into a phase where you're completely zoomed in. And I've got this thing, I'm just living it, and I've got everything in my brain. And then I've zoomed out and I've got businesses I'm running and doing stuff. So I was pretty zoomed in on a lot of the very specifics about what's going on. I'll give you sort of a general understanding. The overall area that is causing angst is for beauty industry schools, and then of course for the recipients of students, which are going to be salons. But the whole issue really rests on whether cosmetology schools should be eligible for federal funding for students. And there is something called gainful employment that creates metrics, that creates accountability for schools to suggest that if someone's going to go to a school, a trade school, in this case cosmetology, when they get out, they better be able to have enough gainful employment that they can pay their loans back and they can make a good earning. So gainful employment came in during the Obama administration, and there was a school association that challenged it and successfully won against the Department of Education. And then the next administration came in and gainful employment was completely off the radar. It came back on the radar in full force by the Biden administration. And it's in the process of legislation being finalized. It's in a comment period, I think, or the comment period's over, and very, very soon, it's going to be hot off the press, it's going to come out with what the future looks like for the criteria that beauty schools will have to pass in order to keep federal funding for their students. And it's not a bad idea to create accountability for a school. It's a reasonable thing, and I think there's well-intended individuals, including the government, that are trying to create some accountability, because there has been career colleges that imploded, and including in the cosmetology space. In fact, a lot of the problem schools came from cosmetology.
And tech too, by the way. I remember the ITT
Yep.
Technical Institute scandal, and there have been these trade schools that have been working loopholes in the system to benefit off of demand for trades and then not quite getting the ROI from that education. So it's as you said, it's a reasonable thing to want to look into.
Yeah, I don't challenge the idea. Where I get hung up is I just don't trust the measurements, because when I've actually gone down the rabbit hole of looking at the numbers that the Department of Education is using, they say in their own website that they cannot confirm the accuracy of these numbers. I mean, they disclaim it right on the website, and yet those numbers are being used to determine whether school gets funding or not. So the school industry anticipates that this could be catastrophic and could close up to 90% of beauty schools.
Oh my gosh.
And so the ripple effect on the industry could be quite substantial. Now, I always try to find a silver lining in something here, because that's just my nature. And worst case is that this would go into a place to be effective on July of 2025. So there is time to do things about it. The problem is that there's no recourse. So if a school is denied, they have no recourse. They can't challenge it, whatever. So it's well-intended, but don't trust the data and question whether it's fair to have no appeal process.
So, I mean, just talking from an economic perspective, one could assume that if you think your extension service is expensive now, if something like this passed and there's a period of, people, unqualified, trying to do things that they're not qualified to do, the schools are pumping out labor force, right? Shortage of labor force is going to drive up the cost of that labor. And with driving up the cost of that labor, it drives up the cost of the service, and the people who pay is the American economy for the decision. I mean, does this sound like a smart idea to you? Is there any benefit to this? Are you seeing a benefit to this?
I can't. And also there's a substantial risk of quality risk. And what this means is more kitchen hair, and it also means potential risk from a sanitation standpoint, et cetera. So if someone's not licensed and goes through that process, and there's not enough labor force, there's that factor too, in addition to driving prices up.
As you said, this is a full contact industry, so it would be reasonable to assume at least some licensing process for people that are going to be physical with other humans.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is really interesting, because this is going, I think this would have, and just from looking at it from a labor force and economics perspective, the policy being proposed, I'm trying to understand what the benefit would be, other than when the government lends money, they are charging an interest rate. right? That lending is supposed to be helping the government. If I'm understanding the lending process correctly, they're supposed to make some money by doing that. They're also supposed to be stimulating the economy by providing resources to get higher education and earn higher wages, which honestly, everyone knows, huge revenue source is an employment tax. And so I'm trying to think like, one, who would pass this and why? Do you have any ideas of why this is being proposed by who and what the thoughts are behind how this is going to help?
Well, it's trying to eliminate defaults and to prevent, consumer mistrust. I'm trying to find the best word, but it's really designed as a, oversight that's needed because the system's wrong with default rates and all that stuff. I don't know. I mean, I think that I'm trying to figure out how to comment on this next as it relates to what the benefits would be. I can't see the benefits. And the thing that disturbs me is that what it's really created is economic disempowerment. Because if federal funding is no longer available to support students in a specific trade, it creates economic disempowerment. So imagine a kid that really their dream is to go into cosmetology, and either they're fed a bunch of misinformation about the financial potential, or they can't get funding. It really disempowers a very viable career choice that's of service to the entire ecosystem. So, and the harm that so I am the least political guy that you guys will meet. I stay so far away from politics, it's incredible. But what I will say is that it's contradictory to other public policy that's supporting small businesses, because small businesses are dependent on labor. If you can't get labor, these community-based businesses, again, and there's also parts of the small business world that's really wants to make sure that female entrepreneurs are well served. And 85% of at least the businesses that we serve are owned by women. It creates contradictory public policy. That's as political as I'm going to get.
I think that's appropriate for.
Is that the first time we've heard of this contradictory policy?
I think it would be worthwhile, Cash. I mean, this is just me thinking out loud here, but I would love to maybe put together a panel episode. We get maybe Wynn from the Paul Mitchell schools, get Tom, get some. I'd love to dig into this more, just because I think, again, I don't think you and I, Cash, we're in the stream of people on Instagram and on in the social universe that are in the hair industry. I'm not hearing people talking about this. So I'm curious about, who are the advocates? What are the reasons? What are the things people are trying to avoid? What is the disincentive towards fraud? Because as you mentioned, there have been issues with trade schools that have been manipulative. And of course, I think everybody is questioning the cost of education, particularly higher education. So it seems like a prescient thing that would be coming up. But again, it's like, is this the right solution? And what are the potential negative ramifications? We certainly know that supply shortage of qualified, talented labor is something we hear from every single salon owner. Finding great hairstylists is hard. So if you cut off that stream at the top of it, at the headwaters, that could go poorly for a lot of people. Tom, this has been tremendous, and I'm looking forward, as I mentioned, we're also going to talk with Aaron, so we'll talk more about Qnity. But as someone who has had so much insight into this industry, so much experience, and now with so much data, thank you for sharing that with us and with our audience. We really appreciated having you.
It's my pleasure, gentlemen.
I wonder if we can have Tom as like a regular commentator on some of these topics in the industry. We bring him in to argue with some people, present the facts.
Like weekend update.
I love a guy who's armed with an 88-page document.
We're gonna have more data too. We should talk to you guys about some of our data projects. It's pretty darn cool.
Tom, thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking to you again here on this podcast.
All right, gentlemen. We'll talk to you later.
As always, we'll connect personally.
All right.
Talk soon, Tom. Bye.
If you're a hairstylist, if you're a creative professional, and you are interested in your financial well-being, remember to like and subscribe so that more episodes just like this one show up in your YouTube feed.